Good afternoon, everyone. We might get started. I think there's a few people still to come, but you're all got here on time, so we want to make the most of that. So, welcome, everyone. My name is Kelly Anjoli, and I'm the CEO of the Heart Foundation here in Victoria. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting here today, the Wurundjeri people, and any elders past, present, or future. Well, welcome to you all, and thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules to be here for this very valuable and worthwhile event. It's generally believed, I think, in the community that heart disease is only really relevant to older people, and today you will hear that this is definitely not the case, and many of you would know that, and probably the reason why you're here today. Over 100,000 young people between the ages of 18 and 40 are living with some form of heart disease or heart condition every day in Australia. So 100,000 is not a small number. And for about 3 years now, the Heart Foundation has been listening to and working with young people living with a heart condition or have recovered from heart surgery about what is important to them, their challenges, their fears, their frustrations. And today, on their suggestion, we have developed a forum to help give you a snapshot of those issues and support needs of this group of cardiac patients. And we hope the information that you receive today and the connection that you have with each other will not only help you with the care you give, but also go some way in helping to address some of the gaps that those young people are feeling, or to fill those gaps, and by doing this improve their well-being, their quality of life, and of course their health outcomes overall. I would like to warmly welcome, I don't think she's quite made it into the room yet, but our speakers, Dr. Angeline Lint and Dr. Rosemary Higgins, for being here today and speaking with us. And also a heart patient herself, Belinda McDonald, who is here in the front, who you'll hear from in a moment, who've really generously given up their time to be here and give us their insights today. And again, as I said, I'd like to thank you for coming this afternoon. And the proceedings are actually being recorded today. So welcome all of those of you who will be watching the proceedings at a later date on whatever device that may be. So now to get the forum underway, because you don't want to hear from me for the rest of the afternoon, you want to hear from our speakers. So I want you to please welcome my colleague here from the Heart Foundation, Tess Pryor, who's our Community Engagement Officer and who's been absolutely integral to actually the work that we've been doing with our supporting our Young Hearts program, supporting Young Hearts program. And so she's going to speak a little bit about that program today to set the scene for the forum. Now, just a little bit about Tess. Tess has worked at the Heart Foundation for 7 years with a focus on supporting people living with a heart condition and helping to strengthen and extend the capacity, particularly of peer support programs across Victoria. Currently, she is leading, as I mentioned, the Supporting Young Hearts program, targeting younger people under 40 living with a heart condition, and really trying to connect them to each other, which is a group that has, from the comments and the discussions we've had with younger people, this has been quite challenging to actually connect with one another, particularly when you're a younger person suffering from heart disease or some form of heart condition. So really, she's been trying to help to connect people and helping them receive the information and support they need to manage their own physical and emotional health. So as I said, Tess is going to set the scene for this afternoon by giving you a snapshot of what the Supporting Young Hearts program is really all about and how the program has progressed, and really a little bit about the impact it's having already, even only after a really short time since it's been started. So if you could please welcome Tess Pryor.
As Cal said, I'll just set the scene for today and talk about, when we're talking about young people living with a heart condition, this is who we're talking about. As Kelly said, there's just over 100,000 young people across Australia, and as you can see there, with the prevalence, 80,000 of those 100,000 actually have an arrhythmia. And with hospitalisations, over 1,000 are hospitalised each year for a heart attack. So as we said, and I know that a lot of you I met already have said to me that you're working with young people, so we do know that it's not an old person's disease. So why are we working with young people and how did Supporting Young Hearts come about? 3 years ago, our volunteer coordinator had reported that quite a number of young people had contacted her asking to volunteer in some capacity with the Heart Foundation. She had a feeling that there was something more to it, and it sort of seemed like there was a lot of young people out of the blue had appeared. And she spoke to me. I've been working with older people in the peer support groups across Victoria, and I interviewed 10 of the young people. And even though they all had very different heart conditions, very different cardiac histories, they seemed to have come to the Heart Foundation for the same reasons. And after the interviews, I grouped these reasons into 3 domains, and it was support, information, connection. Those were the 3 things they said they really needed. And when we talk about information, they would say, for example, they were talking about nutrition. They said, I'll give an example of somebody, one of our young people who was diagnosed with coronary heart disease at 37. He was in shock because he thought he lived a very healthy life. He cycled, he ran, he ate very healthily. He was in shock and wanted to know, how can I eat healthily? How can I learn how to cook? Where can I get heart healthy recipes? Where can I get information about what's good for my heart, what's not, stuff around what's a good fat, what's a bad fat. So they had a lot of questions around nutrition, and they were really keen to do something about that. The other thing was exercise. For many of these young people, because the average age when I spoke to them was probably late 20s, a lot of them had been really active before their heart surgeries or before their diagnosis. So being told they could no longer exercise or that their exercise had to change was another massive adjustment for them. So they wanted to know, what can I do? Is it safe for me to lift weights? Can I still go running? Can I rock climb? Can I scuba dive? All those things that they took for granted. Medications. Having to take daily medications for the rest of their life for most of them was something that was a really big shock for them. And they wanted to know, why am I taking it? How's it affecting my body? What happens if I stop? And what are the side effects? Emotional health. This was a huge thing. All of them said, regardless of their cardiac history, that the shock of diagnosis or having open heart surgery was a really massive big thing for them, massive big impact. For 50% of the young people I spoke to, they had actually been born with a defect, so they had surgery as children or babies. So even having another event or another surgery in their 20s or 30s, even though they had been acquainted with the hospital system, they still found it a huge shock. The thing about this critical life stage, you'll hear that term a lot today, and we're really focused on that with Supporting Young Hearts. When we talk about why we're working with young people, it's because it's a critical life stage. And I know that you'll really love Rosemary's session as a psychologist. She's going to talk about what that actually means for a young person. The other stuff they wanted was around support. We thought that with this young people, because they love the digital age, we thought they would love to have a lot of connection via digital media. But the number one thing they said to me when I said, what can the Heart Foundation do for you? They said, connect me to somebody else just like me. I've never met a young person like me. I have got no idea. I would love to meet someone who's had my surgery or who's living with my condition. So, the other thing they told us too was nobody talked to them about sex and intimacy, and they're in a very sexually active stage of their lives as well. And this really confers with some recent research that the Heart Foundation commissioned last year in Queensland. And they found that this was with health professionals, and 87% of health professionals think it's important to discuss sexual activity or intimacy, but only 24% actually do. So it shows you that there is, even though health professionals know it's important, there's actually getting it together and talking about it's another thing. Cardiac rehab. I know at least half of you here are nurses, and I think more than 2/3 of those nurses are cardiac rehab nurses here. So when we talked about cardiac rehab with these people, young people, they fit into a really interesting, it conferred with the statistics around older people too. We know that 30% of people attend cardiac rehab, and I like to flip that around and say that means 7 out of 10 people don't attend cardiac rehab. So 70% of people who have a heart attack don't actually know what to do next. So these young people are exactly the same. I classified them into 3 groups. There was about a third said they weren't referred, and most of those had open heart surgery, congenital defect, where they were told by the cardiologist that they were fixed and they didn't need anything else to be done. Another third said they attended cardiac rehab but didn't complete it because they were freaked out by the oldies. That's a direct quote. Felt really self-conscious, felt that the activities weren't tailored to them, and they felt no sense of belonging. The third group that completed the rehab, they were a really proactive group, and I found that most of these young people were anyway, but this group, they were really proactive. They understood the value of cardiac rehab, and they were really keen to make sure that even though they felt uncomfortable in the first few sessions, they knew there was an end to it, there was a means to an end. And they actually said in the end, all of them who completed said it was a really great positive experience, and they felt really protected by the oldies, and they actually loved it. We talked to young people about suggestions for helping them with cardiac rehab. And they said what would be great was during the pre-assessment phase, if the cardiac rehab coordinator could chat to them about what the reality of the program, and that you can't actually tailor it to fit every individual, but perhaps you could have chat to the young person and say, we understand these are the limitations of the program, we understand these are your needs, but stick with it. This is a stepping stone to your recovery, and there really is a purpose to this. So they said that having that chat before they started would be really helpful. So the key thing, as I said before, was they wanted from us was face-to-face connection. They wanted to feel like they were part of something bigger, they weren't alone, and what they were going through was normal. They were really keen to hear other people's stories, and through speaking to these young people, because I've been working with peer support groups with older people, the average age with the peer support groups I've been working with was 70. It really made me think about what the definition of peer was. So when we talk about peer, we talk about somebody who's experienced a similar situation or living with a similar condition. But with these young people, I started thinking about a 25-year-old young woman having open heart surgery and living with a huge scar. And I thought maybe a 65-year-old with a chest scar is not a peer for her. A peer for her may be a 25-year-old young woman who's had a mastectomy. So we just started thinking about that, and it kept coming back to that critical life stage. Why is a 25-year-old with breast cancer more likely to be a peer? And it's because of that critical life stage, because they've got all those unanswered questions. So what did we do? So after talking to these young people, we came up with a number of initiatives that we hoped would try to start addressing the gaps, filling some gaps in some way. We set up we called these initiatives Supporting Young Hearts, and we set up an advisory group. So the advisory group consists of 6 young people under 40 living with a heart condition. Coincidentally, they've all had open heart surgery. That wasn't by design. And they have advised us, so we've had funding now for about 18 months, and they've advised us on all areas of the program around resource development, which you'll hear more about in a minute, our newsletters, our face-to-face events, our Facebook group, and the digital stories, which I'll be launching a bit later today as well. We have, so the key initiatives that we have that are accessible and available to every single young person. So after today, all of you can please link your young people to this program. They'll have access to all these resources. Number one is our electronic information bundle. And with this bundle, we produced it with a company called Real Time Health, that's now called Healthily. And they are experts in digital patient stories. And we have 6 young people here talking about their conditions, and the videos are themed into different areas, from diagnosis to coping with lifestyle changes, to getting back to work, to emotional health, to the words of wisdom, life now. So with this bundle, we have these digital stories, we have fact sheets, and we have links to other resources, and a young person can request this bundle through an email from our webpage, and it's sent to me, and then I can link them to this electronic bundle with an SMS link or an email link. So we've had about 120 young people request that in the last 12 months. The other thing we did was bring young people together, and they also asked us if we could bring them together with health professionals. So our first event in 2016, we had a cardiologist who was Dr. James Hare, who's a colleague of Angeline Leach here, who's speaking today, and he was only 39 then, so it was great. So he was actually a young person presenting at our event. And we also had Rosemary, who did a magnificent session on emotional health, and we had a nutritionist and an exercise physiologist. And we brought them together with young people so the young people could ask any question they wanted relating to their condition. It was a fantastic day. But the key thing that came out of the evaluation was for these 50 young people, most said this was the first time I've ever met anybody like me. I felt really normal. So you can see the quotes there. I thought it was fantastic. I've always been alone with my heart condition, and this has made me feel more normal. So from that, this is the other thing I want to talk about, the session that Rosemary ran. We talked about emotional responses, and Rosemary did an exercise with them and sort of said, how do you feel about being diagnosed with a heart condition at 25 or recovering from heart surgery? And you can see there the range of emotions is pretty severe. Like you've got something from, here we go, happiness. So that was somebody who was happy because they'd been feeling sick for ages, for years, and all of a sudden they found out they had a heart defect and they were fixed. To shock, ill, confrontation, ripped off. This was a young guy who was 18 and he was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy. And he said, I haven't even started drinking and now I'm told I'll never be able to get drunk. So there was all of that. And there was stuff around sadness, around mourning, this is the 20s that they were going to lose because they'll never be able to do the activities they thought they just took for granted that they would do. A key thing that came up too was about being confronted by their mortality. And I know Rosemary's going to have a chat about that too later on. Last year we did another event in partnership with Heart Kids, and Tracy at Heart Kids is here today, and we decided that a lot of young women were talking to us saying they wanted more specific information about being a young woman with a heart condition and the lifestyle, once again that word, the critical life stage. They wanted to know about, can I have a baby? Can I get pregnant? If so, how is it managed? We had work around intimacy, living with a scar, body image issues as a young woman. And that night, once again, we had Dr. Angeline there and a gynaecologist, Melissa Cameron, and Rosemary, and they talked about all those issues, and the young women could ask as many questions as they wanted. And once again, they're the quotes that came out of that night. Coming to terms with aspects takes time. Healing physically, emotionally, and mentally is a process. As the Supporting Young Hearts Advisory Group decided last year, the last 12 months have all been around focusing on emotional health, and we had another emotional wellbeing workshop at the end of last year with a young psychologist called Carly Weiner, who works at Headspace with young people, and she really focused on issues such as trauma and grief, and that was another one where it was really emotional, and there were a number of people who had never ever gone to an event like this before. And one young woman, Emma, actually had a cardiac arrest in a supermarket in Bacchus Marsh 2 years ago. She was 33, and she had bystander CPR performed on her by, I think it was a manager at the supermarket before the ambulance came. And she was talking, you'll see her in the video later, but she actually spoke to us, and that was the first time in a year she left the house by herself because she was so scared of being alone after that cardiac arrest. And she came that night and drove from Bacchus Marsh and was just really opening her heart, talking about what it was like to be in her situation. So once again, it just showed us the value of peer connection and how that just cannot be replicated in any other way, besides being with another person living with the same condition. Another one of our initiatives, which has been hugely successful, is a quarterly e-newsletter. So with this newsletter, we have a theme. We have been doing a theme of emotional health for a year, but we do have a theme where we will have a research project, we'll have a recipe, we'll have a young person blogging, we'll have a Heart Foundation event they might be interested in, and we send it out to our community, which I think is about 125 strong at the moment. And the Heart Foundation woman who's in charge of all the stats and things told me that it's actually the most engaged e-newsletter that is sent out from the Heart Foundation now. And young people are clicking on the number of stories many times, and she believes that they may be using it as a reference tool, which is great. And the most popular stories have been the ones from psychologists talking about emotional wellbeing. We also have our Supporting Young Hearts webpage, which is part of the Heart Foundation's general website. And that's our webpage is our one-stop shop for everything Supporting Young Hearts. So that's the thing. I've got another resource to show you a bit later, but this is the page we would love you to refer any of your young patients to, because from this page they can subscribe to our newsletter, they can get an electronic bundle, they can be part of our Facebook group and get updates of all our events. Our Facebook group is another initiative that's gone gung-ho. We've been doing that for about 12 months, and we have 125 members on that, all young people living with a heart condition, and it's a closed group. And I know that Belinda, who's going to speak after me, has been heavily involved in that and using that as a young person for in a number of different ways. You can see here, this is just an example of the sort of conversations that go on here. Someone said, "Hi all, has anyone had to get an ablation? I'm booked to have it done soon because of atrial tachycardia and I'm really nervous about it. I don't think I'm prepared enough." Then we've got a number of people, there's huge response from young people talking about their experiences with ablation. Our Heart Foundation Facebook we use to advertise events such as this, which you probably all, a number of you probably heard about this event through Facebook, and that's been another huge way of connecting with a broader audience. We have been using social media campaigns at length. We use Instagram to promote our events to young people, which has been another hugely successful channel for us to reach this audience. We had, before our emotional wellbeing workshop last year, you can see that was Tom, who is on our advisory group, and he actually is another cardiac arrest survivor. He had a cardiac arrest at 26 was jogging in the streets of Essendon, and once again, another great story. There were two cars going in opposite directions, both had off-duty nurses, both jumped out and performed bystander CPR and kept going until the ambulance came. He was worked on for 45 minutes by the ambulance and they were about to call it, gave him one more shot and he came to. He had a really, really difficult recovery and actually afterwards spiraled into depression, had massive anxiety issues, and now he's jumping out of his skin, rock climbing, running, doing the whole magnificent things. But he's a great example of somebody who really hit rock bottom after his cardiac arrest survival and is now embracing life in an incredible way. He's been a great participant for us in our advisory group. I wrote about him last year and we posted it on the Facebook page, the Heart Foundation Facebook page, and it reached 12,000 people, and the Facebook moderators told us that that's the best response to any story so far. So it just shows you that if you provide the content and get it out in the right way, it certainly really hits the target. We have a promotional postcard which you'll have in your pack, and we actually designed these especially for you guys. So these postcards, and I have many thousands, so please feel free to order as many as you want. They're for you to give to a young patient in any capacity that you meet them, and just the call to action at the back is just our web page, so they can get in touch with us and connect with all our resources just from that one web link there. Well, that's it. That's me. I don't know. How's the time going, Eugene? Great. How quick? 10 minutes early. I was wondering whether, because we only have a bit of question time for Angeline, I was wondering whether we should wait to add some, because I'm early, I can get Belinda up and we can add some questions after all three of us, if you like, those extra questions. Hey, what do you think? All right? All right, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce you to Belinda. And we met Belinda. Belinda contacted me by phone probably mid last year, and she heard about our Ladies' Night Out, which was all about getting pregnant and intimacy and scars and things. And she said, "I really wish, hi, my name's Belinda. I heard about your event. I can't come, but I wish this was available 2 years ago because I had baby after heart surgery and this would have been perfect for me." So then we met for coffee and Belinda's become a fantastic ambassador now for our Supporting Young Hearts program. And she's going to share her story for us. But she's 37 and at 6 months old was diagnosed with ventricular septal defect and bicuspid aortic valve. Shortly after, she had open heart surgery and in time made a full recovery with no ongoing health restrictions and checkups every 5 years. Fast forward to her late 20s and a routine cardiology checkup showed aortic dilation next to her bicuspid valve. Her condition worsened and Belinda underwent valve replacement surgery. Her life took another twist, this time an exciting one. Belinda gave birth to her daughter Elizabeth just over 2 years ago, is that right? Belinda connected with our Supporting Young Hearts program last year and we're delighted to welcome her today to share her story of being a young heart patient from I see you to recovery, motherhood, and everything in between and beyond.
Thanks, Tess, and thank you everyone for being here. Can you all hear me okay at the back? Great. Before we begin, I was going to share a little bit of my heart history when I was a baby, but Tess covered that off. So this is me in the bath at the beach when I was about 6 months old. As Tess mentioned, I had surgery when I was a baby at the Royal Children's. I had a VSD and bicuspid aortic valve, so the hole in my heart was repaired when I was 6 months old. And obviously that was a lot harder on my parents than it was to me. I don't remember any of it. I had the surgery at the Royal Children's and made a full recovery in time. But for me, I'm one of the patients who heart stuff's always been a part of my life. It's part of who I am. I've had a scar all my life. I grew up going to the Royal Children's for checkups. One of my earliest memories is being bored out of my mind, waiting to see a doctor at the Children's. It's not a reflection on the Children's, it's a reflection on being a child waiting to see a doctor. But having a scar and having a heart condition has been my normal. Fast forward to my early 20s, and unfortunately there was no transition for me from the care of the Royal Children's to going beyond the Royal Children's. I hadn't heard of Heart Kids. I don't know if it existed in my time period. By that point, I was on checkups every 5 years. I didn't have a new cardiologist, and this was exacerbated by the fact that I moved house 5 times in 2 years at one point, but I was in share houses through uni, so I didn't have a regular GP. So there was no oversight of my cardiac care at all. If anything, it was my parents reminding me that I should probably go and have a cardiac checkup that got me back into the rhythm of seeing a cardiologist again. What that meant is that I'd fallen out of the cardiac system and I had to seek out a new cardiologist for myself. I always knew that I'd need a valve replacement at some stage. That was my heart condition. I had with the bicuspid aortic valve. That was always on the cards. And for some reason, and I cannot tell you where I got this from, for some reason it was in my head that I would have that surgery in my 40s. I've actually discussed this with my mum, and she's got no idea where I got that from either, because she was at all my appointments through until my late 20s. So I had this in my head that I would deal with the heart stuff again after kids and at a later stage in life. All that said, growing up through my teen years and my 20s, body confidence issues were a big deal for me. I shouldn't say classic, but never wore tops that showed my scar, never wore a bikini, always felt I had to cover it up, felt like it was a beacon on my chest, but it wasn't. It's really not that noticeable. And I felt very self-conscious. I felt like no one really understood what it was like to have had surgery when I was a baby, and particularly because I didn't remember any of it. It just, the scar was the thing. That was the only thing that I could really identify with it. And I certainly didn't know anyone else like me. Also at this time, and it kind of touches on what Tess talked about earlier, I was really active. I did Oxbound Trail Walker. I did that because I didn't want to do a fun run. So I did Trail Walker instead, which was really stupid. I did around Main a day twice. I was president of the Melbourne University ski team. I led a really active life. I travelled extensively. So I'm one of those lucky heart patients that it really didn't impact on my life. The only thing that did was the scar. Then at age 27, I got around to having a cardiology checkup. I had to find a new cardiologist and was diagnosed with aortic dilation around the bicuspid aortic valve. This was a bit of a shock because every time up until then it was like, all right, we'll see you in 5 years. I go in, have the echo, lie down, clean up all the gel afterwards and feel gross, and then have to just worry about remembering to book in another appointment. And so it was like the brakes were put on. I was also told at the same appointment not to get pregnant. This was something that I wasn't at a stage of my life at that point where I was planning on getting pregnant, but being told don't get pregnant opens up a whole can of worms for anyone, particularly women. Unfortunately, at the time, I wasn't told what happens if I do get pregnant. So it's a really unfortunate situation, and I look back on it and wish I'd been more vocal at the time. I actually spoke to the cardiologist over the phone shortly after and still didn't get the answers to the questions I needed. And it prompted, until the next checkup, it prompted a period of great stress in my life. I was with my now husband at the time. He was stressed. It was all around what happens if we do get pregnant. Does that mean, and literally, does that mean that I will die? Does that mean that we need to terminate the pregnancy? Does that mean that I'd be on bed rest for the whole pregnancy? What did that mean? Did it mean that I would then be very sick after being pregnant and having a baby? Like all of these questions that I never really got answers to, which is really unfortunate. And on top of that, and not to go into a whole amount of detail, but no form of contraception is 100% effective. And that's what's kind of you're told through your high school years and sex ed classes, nothing's 100% effective. And then you're like, so what do we do then? We didn't have the answers. A year later, I had my checkup, and it was confirmed that my aorta wasn't dilating any further. And it turned out that the reason I was told not to get pregnant was to confirm that what the dilation that happened with my aorta hadn't just happened straight away, had it happened over the previous 6 years. All of this is very logical, not when you've been stressed for a year. So it was great to have that confirmed. But what it meant is that I was then on annual checkups. Surgery wasn't in my 40s anymore. It was very much on the horizon. At the same time, I was told that I was able to potentially get pregnant if that was what I wanted. That I would be maybe not high risk pregnancy, but it would be a riskier pregnancy. And I'll touch a little bit more on pregnancy in a few slides' time. All through this, I can't tell you how many times I was in tears outside clinics and hospitals, standing on the road, calling family members. It got to a point where I didn't go to any appointments on my own anymore, because literally every appointment that I went to on my own, something bad happened and I got bad news. So I became superstitious that someone had to come with me to every appointment. And as in my late 20s, professional woman working, and it felt very out of control and very not a safe environment at all. I didn't know where to go to get advice or support. And needless to say, Dr. Google really wasn't the answer to anything along the way. So I was 33 when I had my surgery. So it was my second round of open heart surgery. For those in the room, I had a dentals procedure, which was an aortic graft and valve replacement at the same time. It's a really strange feeling going in to have major heart surgery when you feel 100% fine. There was nothing wrong with me physically, except what showed on an echo. So preparing to go in for surgery, when you know you're going to feel like rubbish afterwards, you're told what the experience will be, you're told what to expect, and it's completely bizarre going in when you feel fine. I had ski trips booked before we booked in for my surgery, and I was told not to go on them, but I could if I wanted to. Needless to say, I didn't feel comfortable going skiing at Mount Buller when they said I needed heart surgery. So that was the extent that I felt fit and healthy. There's also a fear that sets in when you have a conversation with your surgeon and they explain to you that there's an X% chance of you dying. There's a Y% chance of something bad happening. And once you've had that conversation once in your life, there's something changes. And it's, even now, thinking about those conversations, it's really challenging, and thinking about how I felt just before I went under for surgery. It's hugely confronting to face those fears. And I do believe it will be confronting for anyone. It's very different confronting it in your 30s than in your 80s. I was a patient at Epworth, who they run a great orientation program the day before you go into surgery. So what you do is you arrive with your partner, carer, whoever it is. Everyone checks in, so to speak. You meet all the other people who are having surgery the same day as you. And they literally will give you a board which has, these are all the tubes that are going to be in, you're going to be on a respirator, this is what to expect, there's going to be monitors all around you. So when you wake up, you know what's normal. So the fact that you've got a tube down your throat is normal. And so you can understand what you're in for. It means also your partner/carer understands when they walk into ICU, potentially for the first time they're walking into an ICU in their life, they understand that this is really good, that she's got all these tubes connected, and that's fine. And I'm just seeing Mel shaking, and I'm guessing she's saying, no, I didn't get that. So I really recommend, if any of you are involved in any of those kind of programs, that's hugely valuable for my partner and I. It also meant that the partners, when they were in the ICU waiting room, they knew someone there. So there's someone else, a familiar face, because it's really hard on your partners as well. ICU, never want to go back there again, ever. It's horrendous. I hated it. I have to have more surgery, and that is the bit that gives me shudders. It's the health professionals, I completely understand it's your workplace. For patients, it is totally not. You wake up from surgery you feel horrendous. You're not allowed to drink. You're not allowed to eat anything. Your mouth is dry. You've had a tube down your throat. You give your right arm to have a drink of water. It's bright, it's noisy, there are people checking your vitals all the time. For me, my back was incredibly uncomfortable because I'd been on a bypass machine, the room had been chilled, so my back had stiffened up during the surgery. One of the disadvantages of the orientation program is I knew the gentleman beside me in the next bed. I'd met him the day before, and he coded multiple times over a period of 24 hours. He survived. His name's Phil. He's doing great. And there was someone on the other side of the ward moaning all night about God knows what. It's a really, really awful experience. I was very relieved to get out of ICU and get onto the ward. The photo on the left to the left, is me a couple of hours post-surgery. I have no recollection of that photo being taken. And I look like shit. The one on the other side is me a couple of days in the ward having my first real coffee. That was fabulous. Because I was scared to have coffee. I didn't want to increase my heart rate, and then the doctors assured me it was fine. Some other things that I experienced was, I mentioned my back and neck. I would have loved to have had a massage or a physio treatment when I was in hospital. There's physios there to do rehab stuff, but there's no one there to treat the pain you're in. And having monitors around your neck, you have to where the monitors connect the leads connection, and they put it around your neck when your neck's really sore. So I ended up with a cut-off dressing gown with it in my pocket. Things like that, it's not necessarily from the patient's perspective and experience to make them feel as comfortable as possible. Just sort of note, yeah. And also, if you're dealing with women, you're not able to wear a bra necessarily. You might not want to wear a bra because your scar's there and it's all uncomfortable. You're feeling very protective. And what that meant for me is that it added to my back pain because I'm not a small-breasted woman. So my surgeon actually suggested bandaging my boobs. And we did, and it was amazing. So if you are dealing with women, that's actually a very real challenge. How do you feel supported and feel like you're sitting properly when you've got a scar and you're trying to contend with a bra? So just a little thing there. I was transferred to the ward. I still don't understand why I was woken up at 5:30 every morning for vitals. It makes no sense in my brain why you wake up heart patients when they're recovering from surgery. I'm sure there's some logic to it somewhere. It's got something to do with rounds.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not for the nurses.
No. But you're interrupting patients' sleep, which should be priority after they've endured major heart surgery. By the end of the week on the ward, I was bored out of my mind and so ready to go home. One thing that my cardiologist did say to me though is I progressed quite quickly and was discharged a day early than most. And that's because I was really fit before I went in. So the importance of being fit before surgery, obviously that's not an option for everyone. If you have a heart attack, there's no option to be fit beforehand. But it really enabled me to recover very quickly. Post-surgery, life as I knew it was put on hold. I worked where I work now, I work for ANZ in a pretty high-stress job, and I was off work for 2.5 months. I had to force myself easy and take a rest. I'm going to jump and explain what that photo is. So There's a reason you're told not to make major life decisions after heart surgery. It's actually in the book. My apartment was flooded and we had to move house. It's really hard to pack and move house when you can't lift more than 2 kilos. You are useless. So we moved and had to actually say to the insurers that I actually had to be relocated. It was not safe for me to be where I was. That was a couple of weeks after I'd had my surgery. Prior to that, we'd been staying with my mum and dad. We couldn't stay in my apartment for the first few weeks because it was a second floor apartment with stairs in the inside between the bedroom and the bathroom. So stairs, I wasn't at that fitness level yet where stairs were safe. And everyone was just more comfortable with me being at home in a single level house with mum and dad. So that just worked better. It also enabled my partner to return to work and not be worried about me being at home on my own. Doing cardiac rehab was good. I was one of the people who did it and met some wonderful people. It was great to get back in the rhythm of doing exercise. That said, I found the exercise extremely boring. Marching on a trampoline. When your idea of exercise is skiing, it's a bit of a shift. And I found a lot of the information in rehab wasn't relevant. It was targeted at people who'd had a heart attack or needed to undergo a major life change, whereas for my condition, pretty much it was continued. Once you've recovered, it was back to normal. It also, one of the things that still sticks in my mind, and Tess touched on it earlier, was a lot of the information about when you can return to doing activities was targeted at older patients. Like there was nothing about active bike riding or skiing. It was all about lawn bowls and things like that. So I struggled to know when it was safe for me to do the things that I used to do. After 2 months, I returned to work part-time and eventually full-time. And there were some really rough days there at work. And that's where the emotional recovery and the mental health recovery really kicked in. My mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. I really struggled in meetings with stakeholders. I would regularly be in a room with 20 stakeholders and we'd be negotiating what the best course of action was. And I distinctly remember one meeting, and everyone around the table knew that I was off work for 2.5 months. You don't just disappear without people knowing what happened. Plus I had this new scar. And they knew what had happened, but I'd been saying I was fine. So in this meeting, I could see all the thoughts and I couldn't pull any of them into any logical structure in order to be able to explain myself. And that was what my job was, to do that kind of thing. So I found that particularly difficult. And probably it took me about 5 months to really feel like I was back to myself mentally and physically. Still mentally there are some things that I'm forever changed as a result of having this surgery. But in hindsight, I should have taken it easier. I should have allowed more time to go from part-time to full-time work. Going back to work, though, was really important for me. It was really important for me to feel like life was getting back to normal, but I should have taken it more gradually, ramping up to full-time work again. I also should have been more honest. I don't think I was lying, but I should have been more open, that's probably a better word, about the fact that I wasn't fine. Everyone asks you how you're going, you go, oh yeah, good. You don't go, actually, I struggled out of bed this morning, I'm here and I don't know how I'm going to manage the 6 meetings I've got today. I probably should have been more transparent about that. I wanted to touch on fertility and pregnancy a little bit, and I know it's not necessarily relevant for everyone in the room, but for those that it is, I think it's really important to cover off. As I mentioned earlier, I was dealing with my heart issues as I was navigating a critical life stage, as Tess said, around starting a family. I met my husband, I started dating my husband about 3 months before I found out that I was going to have more regular checkups and I wasn't able to get pregnant. So it was very early days in our relationship. But saying to someone anything about pregnancy, just about, it's so important that you tread really carefully. You don't know what depth of emotion you're touching on when an offhand comment can really cause a lot of pain for someone and a lot of questions and confusion. The choice between a tissue and a mechanical valve played a huge part in my decisions around family. So for those who aren't familiar with this, a mechanical valve meant that I would only have to have the surgery once. I'd only have to have the valve replaced once, but it meant that if I did get pregnant, it would be more complicated because I'd be on anticoagulants. And the overwhelming advice is if you want to have, if you are in a position to choose and you want to have a family, to go with a tissue valve because it is a lot safer for the pregnancy. If I did the tissue valve, more surgery, so I will have to have surgery again in the next 10 to 15 years. But the pregnancy would be more than manageable. So, and from a personal perspective, I had no issues during my pregnancy. The only issue I had was scar tissue. As my belly expanded, the scar tissue from the drainage tubes got really uncomfortable, which my obstetrician, who is brilliant and one of the most experienced OBs in Melbourne, he'd never heard of that before. So I had all these checks and it turned out it was just scar tissue from the surgery. Something else to consider is, so crash course in fertility and IVF for those who aren't familiar. When you have fertility treatment, so I have low estrogen, so I needed assistance to get pregnant. It's not just you go straight to IVF. There's a whole spectrum of treatment that you can have. And so you might have some assistance, you might try taking hormones, and there's a number of different options before you get to IVF. And then after IVF, there's like donor eggs and then surrogacy. Some options aren't necessarily viable for heart patients. Having twins is probably not the best idea if your heart's already under stress. That was certainly the case for me, and particularly for my family, which has a history of twins. No one wanted to increase the risk of that anymore. So for me, a lot of the fertility treatment options weren't an option for me. We went straight to IVF. It's also, as a heart patient, you need extra approvals to do IVF. You don't just have to have the police check and the counselling appointment and all the rigmarole you have to go through to do IVF. I also had to get sign-off from my cardiologist, the Melbourne IVF Medical Advisory Board, and the anaesthetic team at the Women's before I was allowed to start IVF. And that's because it's all about, it wasn't so much my ability to get pregnant, it was my ability to safely carry a pregnancy. And for the anaesthetic team at the Women's, it was deliver the child safely. I also had more checkups during pregnancy, and I was very fortunate. I worked with an obstetrician I'd previously met through pre-pregnancy counselling. So I was referred for a pre-pregnancy counselling appointment by my cardiologist to a high-risk specialist OB, Mark Umstad, who practices out of the Women's, and Francis Perry. He's excellent. If anyone comes to you wanting an OB recommendation, I'd recommend Mark. Mainly because I was so not a problem in his eyes. My stuff was easy to deal with, and that was a relief after years and years of being a problem patient or having challenges. And so I met Mark before I even got pregnant, and so I understood what the risks were with a pregnancy. And so when it came time to finding an obstetrician, I went back with Mark, and he was fantastic. However, what it meant, one of the other impacts is some women talk about having a birth plan. I had no birth plan. My OB and my cardiologist had a birth plan, and I just went with what they said. So I was always delivering in the tertiary hospital. I was not having a home birth or anything like that. No, not on the cards for me. It also meant things like I was able to do a natural delivery, but only if I had an epidural. Induction wasn't an option because, again, the whole principle is reducing stress on the heart as much as possible, and inductions can last a long time. So the plan was to have a natural birth. Turned out my daughter wasn't going anywhere, and I had a C-section at 41 weeks. So that's my daughter. It's the happiest photo of my life. She's scream. She's 2 now, so things are very different to then. But it was a journey to get to that point, and I hate using the word journey, but it felt like every time we got through one hoop, there was another and another and another. And I realised that my experience is not what every woman with a heart patient would experience. Not everyone has fertility challenges, but my heart impacted on my fertility options. And so that's something that patients may not be aware of. So beyond all that, there was the challenge of getting back to normal. And one of my biggest lessons, and it was about 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, was that there is no normal. Normal, as I knew it, had gone. And especially for me, I got married 9 months before I had my heart surgery. We'd moved house in that time. I was halfway through my first IVF cycle when I found out I needed surgery. So all the little embryos went on ice, and then we came back 9 months later. And then I got pregnant with IVF. I was very lucky. I got pregnant the first time around. And then we had my daughter and all this. And so where was normal in that spectrum? Was it before I met my husband? Because that's certainly not my normal anymore. And so getting comfortable with that idea was a huge shift for me. I have to reconcile the prospect of future surgery. I honestly don't think about it that much. Every now and again something will pop in, it's just like ICU. I just don't. And it's actually a driver with my husband and I around if we do decide to have more children, I'd rather have them sooner rather than later.
Tissue valve next time.
I can go mechanical, but also it's so my children are old enough to understand what's happening rather than I can't imagine doing this kind of thing with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. I'm working on prioritising my health and fitness. I have a 2-year-old. It's a bit of a joke, really. But I'm working with an exercise physiologist now to help me manage that. And for me, one of the biggest things over the last year has been discovering the Supporting Young Hearts group. It didn't exist when I was going through all this. And as I said to Tess a year ago, I wish it had have. I love that there's a group of people who you can share your experience with and ask advice. And some of it might seem random. But Mel will remember what I'm going to talk about now, but I'm going to the States in 2 weeks and I couldn't get travel insurance. You're going through the forms and you've got to tick the boxes and, have you ever had an abnormal heart rhythm? Tick. Well, it turns out that's the box that declines you for everything else. And so I posted on the group asking who does everyone go with? Got some great suggestions and I've now got travel insurance. If you hear of anyone with that problem,
it's very expensive.
It's expensive. You need to find a travel insurer that doesn't have an automated form. You need it somewhere where you can write what your heart condition is. My history doesn't fit neatly into their boxes, and so I just get ruled out. So I've now got insurance, which is great because I'm going to the States in 2 weeks. And I'm not going.
Interested who you got the travel insurance?
Through my ANZ credit card of all things. I think it was Allianz. Yeah.
Because it's a frequent. We always tell our patients to don't do that the day before you go.
Yeah, I'll let Tess. I'll look it up and let Tess know. Because it's tricky. And one of the advantages of the Facebook group is that I didn't know where to ask that, and then I got 4 or 5 suggestions and was able to get that covered, which is really good. As I mentioned at the Facebook group, I told the group I was doing this presentation and asked for their thoughts on what I should say. So I wanted to share verbatims from them around some of the things that were important to them. One mentioned that he wasn't given much information about side effects of medication. His original cardiologist told him that wasn't his problem, he was there to look after his heart. And so he changed cardiologists, and the new cardiologist said that it was potentially because older patients are generally at a point in life where they're slowing down. And so some of the side effects he was experiencing were more prevalent because of his stage of life. And that was something when he posted that had never occurred to me that could be a challenge. There are a few people who said there were more support tailored to young people. That's obviously why we're here today. And it's the acknowledgement that you lead busy, active lives, stressful jobs, working full time, trying to maintain a relationship. Some people trying to find a relationship, start a relationship, raising kids, trying to get pregnant. It's a critical life stage, as Tess said. It's also the financial impact. Someone else mentioned this is huge. So if someone says to you, as someone experienced, she had trouble getting medical clearance to return to work and was told to reconsider her career. Just like that. Just reconsider your career. And you're in your 20s and you want to buy a house and you want to do all these things. So it's maybe less of an issue for older patients because they don't have as many working years ahead. They have bought their houses and things like that. So there are different things that happen for this age group. Assumptions getting made. This one surprised me. One of the guys, single and living alone when he had heart failure and wasn't offered any after support. So he checked into a hotel until he was fit enough to fly home. And he thought that if he was an older patient, he would have been asked if he had care at home. So that's unfortunate. We shouldn't make assumptions around people's stages of life. And if you live interstate from your family and all those kind of things, it's not necessarily obvious who your carer might be. Isolation. Isolation, the importance of mental health care, how people didn't know that you could get a mental health care plan, things like that. So there's support out there and it's connecting people with the right support. Some described having PTSD and anxiety after their heart event. One described how she got a handout with one paragraph of information about depression, and that's it. So it's an area that young heart patients are calling out for more support and advice. One said asking people, how are you, instead of how's your heart? And that's a role that I think all of you can play. It's not just the role of the cardiologist, but it's everyone involved in heart care, because that's what people want to be asked. And finally, I wish the walls of the ward were covered in material of groups to join, supporting Young Hearts Info, how to get a mental health plan, phone support services, and so on and so on. How good would it be if we could get posters in every cardiac ward and every echo room across the state with information about support resources for young patients? We can surely replace the 10-year-old posters that are up on those walls right now. There's 100,000 young people living with a heart condition across the country. I think we can reach more than the 125 who are currently in the Facebook group. There's a lot more that can be done. I've got some ideas on how we can do this, one of which is to talk to Kellyanne about how we can make the Supporting Young Hearts info more prevalent on the Heart Foundation website. If you have any ideas, talk to Tess, talk to Mel, who's also here, about ways that we can reach the patients that you're working with, because you're on the front line. So if you have any suggestions, please let us know. Supporting Young Hearts would have made a huge difference for me 5 years ago, and that's why I'm here today sharing my story with you, because young heart patients desperately need support, and that's why Supporting Young Hearts is so important. Thank you very much.
One of the things that Belinda too becoming part of our connection with us is we recommended her to apply to be consumer rep with the Department of Health on the Safer Care Communities committee, and she was accepted, and she's running off now to the first ever meeting as a consumer rep. So thank you so much, Belinda, for sharing that. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Angeline Lee. No, can I grab you for a sec? Angeline completed her cardiology training at Monash Medical Centre and Royal Melbourne Hospital, and then spent a year in Papua New Guinea as a doctor with the Australian Volunteers International. She returned to the heart failure and heart transplant unit at the Alfred Hospital, Melbourne in 2004, where she's remained ever since. Last year we had, as I mentioned before, our Ladies Night Out, and I remember Angie spoke for the first time for us. And she had a really, really bad virus, remember Ange? And she was incredibly compassionate. She turned up, she answered so many questions from young women. She displayed this incredible connection with young women and just stayed until she answered every question that every person in the room had for her. And we are really, really grateful that Ange decided to present again today. So I warmly welcome her.
Thanks very much, Jess, for having me back. I really enjoyed last year's session, so hopefully this year will...
Are you sick again?
I was. Great, thank you. It's a big job to follow Belinda because, you know, I've heard so much in her presentation about the sort of experience that we try to avoid, and I hope that's sort of something that over time will change. But as with anything else, I think in the medical world it will be a very slow change, unfortunately. So I'm here representing the Alfred and giving you my perspective on how we look after young adults with cardiology issues, and my interest obviously of heart failure, mechanical hearts and transplantation. So most of my patients would have had major surgery and had to recover as Belinda had to. Thank you. So the young adult heart transplant clinic started just over 7 years ago in direct response to a recognition that patients who were transitioning from a paediatric healthcare facility, that is the Royal Children's Hospital, often got lost and were not followed up, such as Belinda, or when they were referred to us, felt so uncomfortable about changing healthcare providers that half of them didn't turn up, and then were therefore then lost to follow up. And we knew that, looking at sort of literature around the world, that what we call the danger period is the age group between 17 to age 29. And for some reason, the age group between 21 to 24 is particularly vulnerable. And I say that because we know that if we look at the transplant population, where you don't take medicines, you develop heart rejection, heart function fails. If we don't get that quickly enough, the patient would die. So we have very, very hard objectives that we can measure in the heart transplant population. Other medical conditions, cardiac failure, for instance, there isn't such a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of effect. You know, some patients, I'm sure, in the young adult world with cardiomyopathy, say asthma, for instance, might not take the medicines 25% of the time, but that might kind of just be okay. But with a heart transplant patient, you do not take your medications for 1 or 2 days. There's a real potential risk to get rejection. So it's kind of easy for us to measure that. And so we know that this sort of data probably reflects what happens in other medical conditions as well. So we know that there are high cardiac graft failure rates and therefore potential mortality in these age groups. And if we want to try and give it numbers, it's a weird way of looking at this, but they look at the number of events per 100 patient years. So if you look at the 21 to 24 year age group, their rate of graft failure was 5, and compare that to the baseline where the lowest rate was in ages 2 to 12 and age greater than 40, the events were 5. So that high danger period was associated with an almost doubling of adverse events. So this is just giving you a graphic schematic of this. So can you all see this one here? So this is the event rate per 100 person years, and this is the age cohort of the heart transplant recipients. So there's a high failure rate in the first 6 months in patients who operate at less than 10, just because of the enormity of congenital heart surgery operation in this group. But of the survivors, you can see that most of them actually do quite well, and they have a reasonably flat line up to the age of sort of 16. And we can only surmise that that's because there's overarching parental control. And so therefore medications are being given and medications are being taken. Something happens in this red box here. So that age between 17 to somewhere 25, 30, I've seen 35-year-olds, where that transition period is met with high risks of adverse events. Why is this so? So we know that the increased risk of graft failure is what's being known now as the emerging young adulthood period, and that this increased risk happens regardless of the age of transplant. So you can have a 1-year-old who was transplanted and is doing absolutely well. It's that 17-year-old age group and it suddenly plummets. You can have someone who's transplanted at the age of 16 and has graft failure at the age of 17. We know that the risk factors are if they're females, non-Caucasian race, and also if they come from a lower socioeconomic status. But why? Why? So there is, in the heart transplant population anyway, a thought that perhaps the young, emerging adulthood group have an increased immune reactivity, increased exposure to the world, etc., etc. However, non-compliance, poor adherence, we see this over all of literature. And we can see that because we can see drug levels plummet. We can see drug levels of immunosuppression medicines becoming suddenly highly variable. That's if the tests are being done at all. So why does this happen? What's particular about this young age group? And I think that's absolutely the key
if we're going to try and turn this around and help them navigate this process. So if we look at sort of the adolescent, young adult period, this is sort of the age divisions that's been put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it kind of makes sense when you think of early adolescence being sort of high school age. There's a lot of parental involvement, usually with some sort of carer. They're in high school, thinking of what their next job will be. Late adolescence is usually a time when some will be starting to leave home, either going for further education or starting work. And the young adult period is usually when people are starting to move out of home and find jobs. So this is a period of great transition, this late adolescence and young adult years, because there's increased independence from parental supervision. So the developmental tasks that's involved with adolescence and young adulthood, and this is what all of us went through with various levels of success, would be the formation of self-identity. So important. What are we? What are we in relation to the person sitting next to us? What's my value in relation to the person next to us? Am I pretty? Am I handsome? Am I fat? Am I thin? Am I, what does my scar mean? Can everybody see it? That kind of. And then all of the tools, all of the enormous brain changes that prepare us for adulthood. So if we look at intellectual development characteristics to start with, this has given me a lot of insight as to why our young adults behave the way they do. It's not because they woefully are manipulative or are malicious and they don't want to live. It's because they actually do not have the brain development to cope with the tasks that you're giving them. So, as the patients are transitioning through from young adolescence through to young adulthood, initially they're pretty set on things that are in the present. They live for the moment, which is great, because that's often what we try to make ourselves do, right? Please live in the moment. Don't think about what you're going to be doing next week, think about what you need to do today. But young adolescents are stuck like that. And so that kind of makes us think, geez, they're concrete in their thinking. They can't think about it. If they don't take their medications now, they're not going to be dead in a year's time because they can't think that far ahead. Okay, they're thinking about their party tonight, or they're thinking about the amount of sleep they're going to get tonight or not, so they can do something for tomorrow. And so therefore they have an inability to consider the long-term consequences of their actions. It doesn't even favour in their minds because they're not thinking about next year. But over time, as their neurological development progresses, they develop a gradual appreciation of the subtleties of situations and ideas. And so they can start then becoming a little bit more flexible in their thinking. And this is where you can start to work with them in terms of trying to problem solve situations. And they develop an evolving ability to solve and manage complex problems on their own. And this is the key. Through this initial period, they still need to solve problems, but they don't have the ability to do so. So we need to help them. But remember, they may become one day, wow, look how much they've progressed. And then the next clinic visit, what happened? So they will flick backwards and forwards quite a bit. And it's not because, as I said, we're trying to be difficult. It's just where they are. And we need to work with that. And often, they'll act without thinking. So I had a patient who was a vegan and did that because they thought they were being healthy. But then in the next sentence said, oh, but I've also started smoking. Which part of that's healthy? So that gives you a sense of where they're at. Their emotional development. So this is a time when they really want to be independent. They're autonomous. Their friends are moving out. They want to move out too. They're distancing themselves from their parents. So that is probably part of the reason why medication adherence is not as good, because parents aren't making sure that they're taking them. They want more time with their friends. So there's increased exposure to peer pressure. Contentious behaviour occurs. Well, my best friend's got a tattoo right over there, whatever. I want one too. What do you think? I've got a heart condition. I had an arrhythmia, but I want to go bungee jumping. What do you think about that? Social development. So they're expanding their social circles. They're developing personal and intimate relationships. But there's a lot of frustration here Because on the one hand, they want to be independent. They can see their peers becoming independent. But for whatever reason, it is quite possible that they may be having difficulty finding employment, they may be having difficulty securing housing, or even finding a partner. And so they're constantly comparing themselves to other people. Financial dependence on parents can be a big issue. And this is where we find that social work assistance is absolutely pivotal for these group of patients. So peer pressure and fitting in is a big issue, and I also talked about the paradoxical behaviour before. So this is where I think I see adolescents. They're trying to be independent. They're trying to find themselves. They're on a boat that's not very big because they don't have a lot of foundation, they don't have a lot of life experience, but they're trying to navigate calm waters, choppy waters. There's a thunderstorm on the horizon. I see them as trying to navigate this tiny channel and not bounce off the walls and crash. And so I'm constantly doing this, my little lighthouse, trying to get them to check in every so often, trying to just make sure that they're okay, that they steer the straight course. And I think that's what our job is. Everybody has to make this journey. Everybody has to do this transition. For some, it's smoother. For others, it's zigzag course, sometimes not even all on the water. But our job is to try and cushion this as much as possible and find a way to work with them and their carers to make it, hopefully, something that will see them have good quality and quantity of life long term. So what we do at the Young Adult Heart Transplant Clinic is we have a 6-monthly clinic. I think the strength of this clinic is that it involves a multidisciplinary team. This is something that is very, very difficult to do as a standalone cardiologist. And for sure, our heart transplant nurse, our pharmacists will take up and answer a lot of the questions that sometimes the patients are too scared to ask me. For some reason, doctors are scary. So there are 5 doctors in this clinic, so 3 consultants, 1 fellow and a registrar. I think one of the failures of this clinic is that we do have to rotate the doctors through, in that there is a roster system, so it's not the same 5 doctors each time. So when the young transplant patient comes back, most of the time they'll be seeing the same doctor, but sometimes not. And that, I think, is a big failure because consistency, I think, is the key to the management of these group of patients. We also have a psychologist, social worker, physiotherapist, occupational therapist if needed. I think the 2 groups that are used most commonly are the psychologist and the social worker. We have a very, very low threshold for referring our patients through, even just to check that you're okay. Make sure there's nothing else that can be fine-tuned. We provide lunch in the waiting area just to try and encourage people to stay and hopefully interact over food. And we've also held annual seminars for the young transplant patients and their carers before the clinic starts. So it's all planned on the same day. And we've asked the patients what sort of topics they'd like us to cover. So we've done travel medicine, and we also did a session on pregnancy and contraception specifically. And there is also an opportunity for social events with Facebook and social media connection. So the transition process involves notification from the Royal Children's Hospital when they think that they have a young or an adult-ish paediatric patient who's ready to transition, and they'll usually give us 6 to 12 months of a heads up. We will go to their last 1 and 2 appointments at the Royal Children's Hospital. So usually I will go together with our heart transplant nurse, and we'll just sit there as the silent party in the consult room. And the idea of that is that the patient and the family has met us and see that we're not scary people, and they can put a face to the name. And then we actually create a special transition day for them on the first day that they come to the Alfred Hospital. So the heart transplant nurse will personally take them around the Alfred Hospital and show them where all the things are. This is where you have your chest x-ray. This is where the echocardiogram happens. This is where blood tests are. This is where the cafe is. This is where the toilets are. And this is where you need to park, etc., etc., etc. We found that it's really, really important that we establish contact with the patient prior to transfer. So even after we've seen them in the clinic, Our heart transplant nurse has been very diligent in terms of maintaining phone contact with them. Hi, just checking in, making sure that you're okay with this date. How are you going? Has anything happened? And then an SMS reminder as well. And we individualise the transition and management plans. The first clinic review will usually be with the adult cardiologist that they met at the paediatric centre. Just so straight away, there's a recognition. There's a face that they can attach, or a person they can attach to. And the aim is for a consistent adult cardiologist that sees them, particularly if they have complex issues. And we've found that has been the key to turning some of these adverse events around. So the patients will have, as per usual, bloods in the community 2 weeks before the clinic, and then we try to bunch up all the alpha cardiology tests on the same day as when you're actually seeing us. So how do we improve compliance? So we've drastically increased the social and nursing support. So remember the paediatric children who come from an environment where they've got parental support, but they've also had paediatric coordinators everywhere. So the transition to suddenly now being independent means that someone else needs to be able to step in until they can finally fit. We found that the younger patients respond very well to technology. They do not like to pick up the telephone and talk to you, but they will answer an SMS and they will answer a text message, and they're very good on email. Health coaches. So this concept can really be anybody that the patient identifies. Usually it will be the heart transplant nurse or myself, any of the cardiologists, whoever they have identified themselves with particularly. I think peer mentor support is very important. So this was the idea of having sort of a common lunch so that people can hopefully connect over food. And we've found that some younger heart transplant patients have found it beneficial speaking to someone else who's been through the same thing and worked out, how do you get employment, how do you get travel insurance, etc. So initially when the patients come through, of course the parents always come because that's what they've done for the last 20 years. The aim, of course, is to gradually wean the parents off the patient. Now, sometimes it's 6 months in the process. I've got parents still in the room sometimes at 5 years. Is that a failure? No, I don't think so. I think it's very, very much individualised to what the patient needs. And I think that the big key to the communication with this group is to be non-judgmental and non-blaming. So if the everolimus levels or the tacrolimus levels are low, ask them why. Did you miss last night's dose? Did you miss the last 3 doses? That's okay. Let's work out why that happened. How can we change things so that we can try to have it not happen again? And I think putting it back to the patient, how can we find options for this problem together? So a classic situation would be, a patient with a mechanical heart who needs to be plugged into the wall overnight for electricity, batteries during the day, wants to go camping for a weekend. Oh, okay. Well, where do you want to go? Somewhere really remote. How's that going to work? Okay, generator. Do you have one? No, probably not a good idea. Don't think it's that reliable anyway. Number 2, well, how about we think about going somewhere that has electricity to start with, but you still get to go camping. Okay, what do you think about that? So it's problem solving with them. So they're part of the decision making and they feel like they own the decision. So I always bounce it back to them. What do you think? So I'm trying to help them navigate through this, what I see as this channel of the rocks, hoping that, as they're emotionally mature, they're going to be the ones starting to come up with these solutions first. It's really, really important, this concept of permanence of care. So they've been transitioned to us. We hope they like us. We hope we like them. But that doesn't really matter. But the point is, they're not going back to the Royal Children's. Either way, they're stuck with us. We're stuck with them. So there is a permanence of care, okay? There sometimes can be, as you all would know, conflicts of personalities, etc., but we have to find a way to make it work. The other thing that's really, really important, and I take a lot of time with my patients with this, is that our care is unconditional. So I will always say to them, it doesn't matter what you've done, you can always ring and come to us. So, for instance, you've had a big night, an absolute bender, and you wake up somewhere, you get taken to ED, ring us. We can get you transferred to us. Or something's happened, you've had unsafe sex. Tell us, come in, we can check it out. So living with a chronic condition, I think it's really important to acknowledge that anyone who, am I running over?
Yeah, no, you're going good.
Yeah. It's really important to acknowledge that anyone who's been diagnosed with any medical problem really, but hearts obviously, in my case, they need to grieve for their previous life, okay? They need to grieve for their normal heart. And that applies to every single condition. It doesn't matter if they had an abnormal heart and then it's completely normalised. They've still gone through that grieving process, and we need to recognise that. The patient that worries me the most is the one who pretends that everything's okay, because you know it's not, okay? So all that means when they don't open up to you is that they're bottling it up inside, and it's going to explode at some point. So I think that everyone who gets diagnosed with any medical condition does develop a mental health issue, okay? It's a question of how severe it is. It might be mild and transient, or it might result in, depression, or severe depression. And I like to say to patients that it's possible to achieve what most of their peers do, hopefully, if we can get their quality and functional status good enough. But we may need to think of alternate ways of doing it. So heart transplant patients, for instance, wanting to travel once they've navigated all the flights, the cost, medical insurance, etc. Well, you're not just going to be any other normal backpacker who can just get up, don't even bring any clothes, and just go. You can't do that, okay? Let's take it back 5 steps. I need you to come and have a chat to me. I need to check out your heart. I need to check your kidneys. I need to check everything, make sure that you're going to be okay for the next 6 months. I'd like to see you. And the other thing I'm going to want to do is send you to travel medicine clinic, make sure you've got all the appropriate vaccinations, and then I'm going to map out your progress with you so that we can know where you can check into if you develop problems. And here's a letter with all our phone numbers on it in case anybody needs to know what's happening with you. And you can have a little summary letter to go with you. And all your medications, don't check that in. You need to carry it all. And don't set boxes, etc. So you can see what I'm getting at. So we need to go through with them every single step of the way, because they can't do this themselves. They've not even thought about it. It's not because they're stupid. They just haven't thought about it. They're in that developmental stage. So you need to do that for them. You need to go at plan A, B, C, D, E. Okay, plan A, you should get there. Everything's perfect. Plan B, something goes wrong. You're going to go to this hospital. Plan C, not so good. You're going to fly straight back to us. It's really important to say to them, look, what's this new normal? Belinda talked about what's normal. Well, it's really normal for everybody. I don't know. But it's what you have now. So we need to try and make your healthcare with what you have now a normal part of your new routine. So medications, exercise, sensible nutrition, all of that needs to be something that gradually becomes a reflex, automatic thing that they just wake up and do automatically. And the big concept, I think, in this group is harm minimisation. I mean, of course, we all live in the real world, don't we? We say to our patients, we don't want you to drink more than 1 or 2 standard drinks a night. And you're supposed to have 3 to 4 alcohol-free days a week. But realistically, we know they're going to go out on benders. So what I will say to them is, look, I know that, things can sometimes happen, but if you think there might be an issue, just ring in and check in. Try and reduce the number of times that you do it. And that's what I say to them. Medications and clinic appointments. When a patient walks out with a script, I'll always say, who's going to fill up this script? Is it going to be the patient or is it going to be the parent? We talk about cost of this. Can you actually afford this? I always encourage my patients to use dosage boxes or Webster packs, which are packed by the pharmacist, because that takes away the number of potential errors each time they're popping their tablets. So if they can put aside an hour a week and they do their medications according to the list, and someone can potentially help check it, that minimises the error, BD, TDS, QID. And as I said, developing a routine for medication taking, I think, is the absolute key. So getting them to link it with something, and I like for them to link it to the meals. So transitioning from parental administration of medications to sort of, standing there and supervising them, filling in the dosette box, to absolute independence full time. And remember, of course, that compliance tends to occur when the patient feels well, which is what we actually want them to do. We want them to feel well. But the flip side of that is that because they feel so well, sometimes they forget they need medicines to keep feeling well. So from my perspective, I think the minimum time we need to see a young adult transplant patient is, or a young heart patient, a minimum of every 6 months. So to start with, when we're first getting to know them, it can be 6 weeks, it could be 3 months, but at a minimum of 6 months. Memory aids, so as I said, this group are very good with using phone apps, SMS reminders. There are lots and lots of phone apps that they can use to help them with medicines. I should actually give you the website for some of them.
We can distribute it.
And I'll just touch very quickly on sternotomies and thoracotomies. I think Belinda's done a great job with that. And I think it's very difficult to prepare a patient adequately for what they're about to be up against, because everybody's experience is so individual. So we have had, for instance, heart transplant patients, mechanical heart patients, who've met other patients about the same procedure, and they come away and they've experienced something completely different. But at least it gives them an idea of what's going to happen and what they can expect. So it reduces the trauma of the whole procedure. Recovery time is highly variable. So for the heart transplant patients, I tell them, you worry about the first 12 months. For other sternotomies, I say don't expect to feel like you're feeling okay until about 6 to 9 months. And that includes emotional recovery time as well, which I think Belinda's touched on. I think physiotherapy assessments are underdone in that we don't refer often enough. I think that every patient who develops a new cardiac condition really should undergo cardiac rehab, mainly for education, but also to help the patient prove to themselves that the level of exercise that they're doing is safe, because it's in a monitored environment. Now, how quickly they can then ramp up thereafter, as you say, some people are used to skiing and other people are used to long poles, but once they've worked out what the baseline that is safe is, then they can then work out together with the cardiologist and the physiotherapist how quickly they can ramp that up. So ARCDs and pacemakers, already you're different, and there's so many ways that it stands out, because you can't go through metal detectors at the airport. So, here you are, this person that's, you're the terrorist, you can't go through the metal detectors. What's wrong with you? Everybody's looking at you. There's a lot of fear surrounding potential ICD shocks. So, at the Young Women's session, there was a mother who asked me about the risk of the baby getting shock. Now, shocks are not transmissible. There's too low a voltage. So someone could be hugging you, they could be having sex with their partner, and it's not transmissible. The main thing is if they lose consciousness, of course, and you're holding the baby, there's the risk. Okay. Now, having had an ICD shock can be very traumatic. I'm sure all of you have looked after patients who've had awake ICD shocks. Almost invariably, I think probably 90% of the patients need to actually debrief about it, and a significant proportion need to actually see psychology to manage the anxiety of it. And remember, of course, once they have an ICD, the Off-Road guidelines have changed. They can no longer drive commercial vehicles unless, of course, they've managed to find an EP doctor who signs them off. And as soon as you've had any sort of indication of ICD, you can't be a pilot. Potential interactions with workplace equipment, so it needs all to be checked out. And I think Rosemary will probably talk about the scar and the body image, which is an absolute massive issue for these young patients. So sex. I don't get asked about it very often, actually, and I suspect that's because I'm a doctor. The people who tend to get asked are the nurses. And, they often will say, look, this is what I think, but you need to just check with the cardiologist. My standard answer generally is if you can walk up 2 flights of stairs comfortably, you're pretty much okay. But otherwise, think about different positions. And I use that then as an opportunity to talk about safe sex practice. We always talk about contraception, particularly the thrombogenic risk of combined oral contraceptive pills. There are lots of options out there now that do not increase the thrombogenic risk, and it's all very individualised. We also talk about the potential for unplanned pregnancy, what that might mean for the patient. So pregnancy and childbearing, it may be safe and possible in some conditions, but there are a lot where it isn't. And I appreciate the absolute devastating nature of any news which might fall into a sort of a negative flavour. But we always need to think about potential heritable conditions. So we need to consider genetic counselling for these patients. Mechanical prosthetic valves are a standalone group. It can be managed, but it is highly dependent on very, very accurate and very, very exact timing of medications. And remember, of course, I always remind the patients there's many, many ways to have a family. Okay? You don't actually necessarily need to be pregnant to have a baby. Lots of other potentials to consider. And pre-pregnancy, and I've highlighted pre because it's so important. I like to have at least 6 months to 12 months lead up. So we need to do a very good functional and cardiac assessment, an echocardiogram, a stress echo. There's lots of medication changes that we need to undertake before the lady becomes pregnant. Combined care with an obstetrician who's well trained in high-risk pregnancies is an absolute must. And Belinda already talked about the regular reviews during pregnancy, and particularly if they become symptomatic. And I actually like to touch on breastfeeding issues beforehand, just to get a flavour of what the patient's thinking, what their beliefs are, and whether or not we may have some room to move with medications afterwards. So other issues, non-prescription drugs, these patients can't just go and take non-steroidals off the counter. They might exacerbate their heart failure if that's what they've got. Herbal supplements might interact with their anticoagulation medications. Recreational drugs, it's a big thing. Lots of effects on the heart. Intravenous drug use, risks, etc. with endocarditis, cocaine, amphetamines. These are all actually quite commonly used now. And tattoos. When patients ask me, I don't say no. I say, if you really, really, really have to, but think about the infection risk. Think about where you're actually going to have it done. Are those needles sterile, single use only, reputable place, etc., etc. And here's your antibiotics if you get an infection. So employment is a big deal. Patients with pre-existing cardiac conditions find it very, very difficult to get meaningful employment in fields that they want to do afterwards. So heart transplant patients, mechanical circulatory support. The patients who I've found who've been able to get jobs afterwards have been able to do that because they've been on leave for the original operation. So more than 25% are unemployed after heart transplantation. And this may be because of medical restrictions to work and limitations, be it either physical or mental. So addressing mental health issues is an absolute must in all of these patients, and to have a very low threshold for referral. And remembering, of course, that ICDs may have potential workplace interactions. So for me, young adulthood is about navigating the storm of development to calmer adulthood. It's about harm minimisation, making sure they understand that this is permanent, but also unconditional care, and try to make the healthcare routine part of their normal lives. And to always, always, always remind them that quality and quantity of life is possible, but we may just need to think about alternate pathways to get there. Thank you.
Angie's perfectly timed this, so we do have time for questions before afternoon tea. So I've got a volunteer for my great team.
Oh, Jen. Thank you.
Hi. You mentioned amongst the 3 groups that were more at risk of the graft disease, the female was one, but other than general adolescence, was there anything specific to being a young adolescent female?
I think that's probably where the immune reactivity may come into it. Some of the young females have already been pregnant. But there may be something specific to females, perhaps having a more tumultuous, perhaps hormonally based issue with adherence. We certainly have found that in our young adult group, that the females can be a lot, that can swing a lot more, and sometimes at times with the menstrual cycle.
Any comment on eating disorder associated with this sort of thing? Even pre or post? I have a client like that at the moment who we actually think might be, it's quite complicated on a number of issues with was originally an out of control Crohn's, and we believe 40 kilos weight loss in a year, we believe it's an eating disorder, and now possibly severe, and now she's got a query viral cardiomyopathy, but it's all been quite complicated.
I think it would probably be less than 5% of the cases that we've seen transition through. But there would be a larger proportion, I think, who are in the grey zone because it is a control issue.
Question, more a comment really. I was very interested to hear about your transition clinic, the wonderful work you're doing, and with Heart Kids, we've been developing a parenting coping program to possibly do some of the work that you're doing in supporting independence in these young adolescents and adults a lot earlier, and getting the parents with the coping skills to support the children's coping. So expect more from Heart Kids on that one.
We've already noticed a change.
I don't think so.
Well, they seem to come through already having not heard about Heart Kids and obviously all the programs.
So some of the stuff we're doing is actually encouraging the parents to have the child sit in the patient's seat rather than them being the mediators of all the information. So there's changes in perspective and ownership of disease.
I was going to just say comment about that too. With the young people I spoke to, they were talking about, especially the ones who were the Heart Kids, who had operations as kids, they were protected by their parents. So when they got to 25, 30, 35 and had to deal with open heart surgery, they realised that all of a sudden the onus was on them to start taking medications and to start working out how they're going to cope with the after, before it was the parent asking the questions and working out how, the support programs. So that was a big shock too, having to accept the responsibility for their own, future and health.
And that's why we don't really have an age limit to this young adult clinic, it's 25 is supposed to be when young adulthood ends, and sometimes I think I'd still fall into that category. So, we're very fluid. It's when the patient feels they're ready to be discharged. And sometimes they get discharged and they want to come back. It's perfectly fine.
I'm just going to add to that. One of the challenges that I experienced as a patient in my 20s and 30s is that I didn't know my entire history. Mm-hmm. So it's also that connecting. I did need to bring my mum, for example, to some appointments because I wasn't 100% sure on some of it. So it's that balance between being an independent patient, but also you might not have all the answers that you need. So I think it's great to build that independence, but yeah, I've definitely had to call mum a few times and go, did anyone ever mention anything about this? Because this has come up now and I've never heard of it before.
I was just asking too about the harm minimisation approach. With smoking, if somebody says to you that they're smoking, how do you manage that?
I talk about do they know that there is a quit smoking program. I ask them, why they started, what context do they smoke, is it social, are there features of addiction, are there ways that we could maybe get them to start at the pre-contemplation stage and move to the contemplation stage. I find that we usually don't get anywhere with the first consult or the second or the third or the fourth, but I'll usually always put in a one-liner just so they know I'm still thinking about it. But, at the end of the day, it's their lives. And I say to them, I'm giving you advice because I want to see you an older person, but at the end of the day, it's up to you.
for our heart transplant patients or our patients who may in future need heart transplants, dilated cardiomyopathies, etc., it's a very big stick to say to somebody that we feel we have a big responsibility to donor families, that we would only put a recipient on a waiting list if they were absolutely free of all non-prescription drugs for 6 months. It's a very big stick.
And you do test them too.
We do.
I know, because I've got a couple of clients who've been on that list waiting, having their testing and not achieving their goals. One other quick question. When a client forgets the medication, rather than non-compliance, do you give them a number to call? Oh, I left this, can I take it still? Should I take it? Like National Prescribing Service, is there a number or someone they call if they're thinking, oh, I forgot, what did they say? Could I take it after so many hours? I've forgotten medication. How do you manage that?
So business hours, they can always ring either our heart failure coordinators, and there's a mobile number that they all get given, or our heart transplant coordinators, and after hours it diverts to our cardiology registrars.
Okay, right. So they can have that number to call.
Well, they would need to ring through switchboard after hours and get put through.
Yeah. What about the National Prescribing Service, which is, we often give that to people in the general cardiac rehab. If you forgot, we give them the general advice, 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever, 24, 12 hours. But we do always give them that National Prescribing Service. They can speak to a pharmacist. Is that something you feel would be beneficial for some people? Or is it not going to be specific enough? Because they do get to speak with a pharmacist regarding general medication, but they don't have their full list and they don't have all that sort of stuff in front of them. They can give them general advice.
We haven't done so, I must admit. We've tended to, for our unit anyway, kept it pretty internal.
That's because your service is so good. Whereas for some of us who are rural and don't have such a service.
I think that would be actually something we should look at as well.
Yeah.
Angie, do you ever have the situation like with a number of young people have said to me that they were living active and healthy lifestyles, and then they said their heart failed them, and so after they got fixed, they started drinking, smoking, whatever, and eat. So they get into that rebellious, it doesn't matter because I was really healthy and my heart failed me, so why should I bother now?
Absolutely, and I get that not just in the young adolescent group, but in the 50-year-olds who say, I've never smoked and I've never drank a day in my life, why did I have a heart attack, And look, my response is that we can't help the genetics or, some of those environmental factors that we cannot control. But, the fact that you didn't drink and you didn't smoke, etc., probably pushed out your presentation by 10 years. So, if you had done all of that, you might have been here 10 years earlier and you might not be talking now because you might have made it.
And speaking of family history, like yourself, there are so many people that present in cardiac rehab at 50, and only then do they find out that Uncle so-and-so, Grandpa, and even grown adults have no idea sometimes of their family history. And I think maybe that's something in school or with your GP or something that should be really encourage people's ownership of their health and their own health history.
They can sometimes be a little, can I use the word can of worms? So if we ever get a young patient come to us, we'll do pretty extensive, history taking. Are you sure? Ask, So I say ask upwards with generation and then go across and ask all the way down. It can be a little bit confronting for a patient who's just been diagnosed to suddenly be sending out messages. I've got a weak heart, you better check yours too. Yeah. Oh my God, maybe it's my fault. There's just so much emotion associated with it. I usually don't do a first diagnosis, but I'll start sending out signals in our patients.
I can speak to that too as a young woman that was diagnosed just 6 months ago. Both my grandfathers passed away from heart attacks, but this is, 35, 40 years ago that they both passed. So technology has also come a long way. So I fell into a case of idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy. No one knows why it happened. But, there potentially is a family history there that was just never picked up. So I had to go through that process. My sister had to get checked, my dad, and potentially my sister's daughter as well, which was really confronting. So just to speak to that, sometimes it's the unknown as well.
The way I sometimes approach that is, I'd say to the index family, maybe the way to drop it is to say, look, not that we're
wanting to sort of blame anyone, but you know, the fact that I've been diagnosed with a heart problem, maybe it's a good time for everyone to get checked, just so you can all be, you know, happy and comforted and reassured that it's all okay. And kind of try to put a positive spin on it that way. You know, get checked and make sure you're fine, instead of get checked to see if you're really sick. Putting a different spin to it.
You mentioned about exercise limitations for stenotomy. What are your specific recommendations?
So I am always concerned about sternal healing. So I always will be very much guided by our physiotherapists who are expert at managing this. All of our patients who have sternal surgery, thoracotomy surgery, all have physio assessments before they leave hospitals to give them a set of exercises they should be doing, but equally should not be doing. And then they come back for follow-up with me, and then depending on how things go, they may get an outpatient appointment for physiotherapists as well. It's mainly anything that's going to make you go, so the sternum is really your fulcrum for all of your muscles that do this. So you don't want to be, you know, lifting anything heavy and reaching across and, you know, doing anything that's going to split the sternum, because you've got wires holding it together. It's going to take 6 months for you to form any meaningful bone tissue.
Any last questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think there are some cardiologists that are scary. And please join us for afternoon tea. We'll be back at 3:35 for the last session. Thank you. And as Kelly said in her introduction, this event was actually a recommendation from our Young People's Advisory Group. And one thing I failed to mention today is all our initiatives have been funded by a philanthropic trust called the Perpetual Trustees, Yvonne and Lionel Spencer Trust. So they funded us for 15 months, finishing at the end of October. And there's one young heart team is me and Nell, who is a young heart patient over here, and we're together 1.2 of one person. So that's the team. And the Supporting Young Hearts Advisory Group suggested that we do this event for health professionals, but also suggested we have a session similar to the one that Rosemary did for them in our first ever face-to-face event, because Rosemary went down such a hit with these young people. So for those of you who don't already know Rosemary, I'll introduce you to her. She's a cardiac health psychologist specialising in helping heart patients live better. Her research focuses on how our moods, our thoughts and our social situations affect physical health and quality of life. She holds many honourable positions in this field at Deakin Uni, University of Melbourne and the Australian Centre for Heart Health. She has expertise in clinical research, developing interventions for heart patients and health professionals, developing and delivering group and online training. She's authored over 40 research papers and many other articles. She has enormous experience in the area of helping people living with a heart condition make the lifestyle changes they need to live their new lives after an eventual surgery. So as we keep, all of us keep bumping into this stuff around how to help people make behavioural change, which is a really difficult one. Rosemary is also the co-developer of the excellent Cardiac Blues resources that explore the emotional responses and needs of people living with a heart condition. She's also a really valuable supporter of our Supporting Young Hearts program, and as I said, has delivered a couple of sessions with our young people around emotional health and wellbeing, providing an enormous amount of information and comfort for the young people who attended her workshops. Today she'll give you an insight into the particular emotional challenges experienced by young people after an event or heart surgery and their journey, that word, into accepting a new normal. Thank you. Please welcome Rosemary.
Sounds like I might know what I'm talking about. So, starting here, I started with this surviving and thriving, and that was something that came to me probably about 10, 15 years ago when I was working with young women in our Women and Heart Disease study, and really noticing that thriving, it was more than surviving, that this thriving was something we wanted to support. So this says I had a big brief, you know, way beyond what we can cover, but, you know, these are some of the things that we're concerned about. These are some of the things that are on the minds of you young people with heart disease. So one of the things that I like to do with my patients is to teach them some strategies to manage what's going on in their head. sometimes it's helpful for our health professionals as well. And one of these activities is what I call the drop anchor. This is from acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's just a very quick way to ground yourself and to come back and open up to the present moment. And this is about pushing, if you can go along with me, plant your feet firmly on the floor, push them down and notice that floor supporting you beneath you. Notice that muscle tension in your legs as you push your feet down. So sometimes it's important not to go straight to the breath. Lots of people want to teach you relax by the breath, and there's a lot of resistance. So we're just using the legs supported muscles. So notice that muscle tension in your legs as you push your feet down. And then I just want you to notice and just acknowledge any difficult thoughts, any concerns, any uncomfortable feelings, any concerns about how you might in your service be able to meet the needs of this client group. And I just want you to notice at the same time your entire body, the feeling of gravity flowing down through your head, spine, legs and into your feet. And just look around and notice what you can see and what you can hear. Notice where you are and what you are doing. And I want you then to become aware of this noticing part of yourself, to become aware of your awareness. And just notice how you can be here in this moment, in this place, maybe with difficult thoughts and feelings, and be present. So that's a very quick activity, isn't it? But it's that many people, will be wanting to run away from difficult feelings, difficult thoughts, difficult conversations. And some of this stuff is about having difficult conversations as health professionals, having conversations about areas we might not be comfortable to ask about, like people's sexual habits, like their practices, like, not assuming that we have got 100% adherence to, and that we've got agreement on goals. Now, this is another thing that I was thinking about, and these are these adult life stages. I love this way where we've got, in early adulthood, we've got the enterprise stage. And many of our patients, with these young patients, are at this enterprise stage, accomplishing those responsibilities, finding home, establishing families, circle of friends. And then we've got this second group, which is this contemplation, that sort of starting to reflect upon the deeper meaning, forging ahead with new understanding. Sometimes you'll notice that when you're at that stage of your life, maybe you do take a bit of a moment to have a bit of a review. Mature adulthood, we see that as a stage of benevolence, where if we're lucky, we start to be giving back. We might be doing that earlier. Late adulthood is wisdom, that we can be guided by experience. And in death and dying, those who are dying or who have died teach us about the value of living. So these stages of adulthood are important to keep in mind, because when we're thinking about our adult life stages, what do you think? And I want people to say, how does having a heart condition about this, how is that impacted by this life stage? Any ideas?
Interrupted, unable to be done.
Interrupted enterprise, yeah. What else?
I think finding a partner too.
Yeah, that
Knowing that you have an ongoing health condition.
Telling my story, and that thing about, it's how are they going to react? How am I going to react? We're thinking of a partnership for a long time. Maybe my thoughts are I'm not going to be here for as long as that. And what's, putting myself there in that spot is a feeling of responsibility to that partner, to future children, to self, to relationship. A lot there around that. Yep, what else? Any other thoughts?
Living in constant fear.
living in constant fear, yeah, and being fast-tracked into that constant fear. And I'll talk a bit more about that.
You can stop, depending on in the earlier part where we say that you don't sort of have the wherewithal cognitively to make some of those decisions, it makes you once again dependent when you're just trying to become independent. You've totally interrupted
that move
towards
towards independence.
Also makes you consider your mortality a lot earlier than what most people would.
Yes. And what do you think that, considering that mortality, and we've got 2 volumes of Handbook of Psychocardiology that I've got a couple of copies, and I was thumbing through last night to find where perceptions of mortality in young people were in this handbook. 700 pages, not one bit, but it is in the clinical practice and patient story. So generally people are making those confrontations with mortality at some stage of their life because we're all mortal. But this fast tracking, usually they're having it around this benevolence and wisdom stage of life, where they've got a few more resources to actually process this understanding of mortality. I'll get in trouble if I don't take the mic with me. So they've got a few more resources to process that understanding of mortality, but they've also got their community resources, the others around them, their brother-in-law or friend at bowls who've been through the same thing. So this isolation of being the only one there. But I also think that for some, there's probably a bit of fast tracking of these developmental stage into a wisdom that you're not ready for, and a giving back and a meaning making that in the sort of, in that thinking about the number, that I am, the 25 years, 28 years, that doesn't fit. So again, you're isolated from peers because you're thinking of wisdom, benevolence, maybe, and they're thinking about the next shag. It's a different spot. So I think that having a heart illness can impact on that life stage as well in a different way. So these are some of the unique challenges that younger people with heart disease have fed back to us. That it can feel lonely, that you're alone, that you want to fit in and be normal, that there's financial, the missing out on parenting, and and the reactions of others, and that feeling like, that people feel pity or whatever, and that I'm not, and the scars and the sexuality and fears for future relationships. These are what our young people are telling us. So that's a pretty hard, big old thing to raise in a standard cardiac rehab program, which tells us why it is so important to have an initial assessment that's patient-centred, patient-focused, that can go with where they're at, that can open up to this, to know that how important this is, and that these are the issues. And if you can do patient-centred care, you will hear this. You'll hear this again and again and again. And if you're not hearing this, then there's something about how you are doing your work that's stopping this happening. So if you want to hear these stories, they're there, but people are not going to tell you unless they feel safe, or that you will have appropriate care or empathy or whatever. So to reveal this stuff, you need safety. So what do you think of, I like this survey of 100 young cardiac patients, a mean age of 27 years. How many percent saw their body as disfigured, do you think? Have a guess. 80, 100? Anybody else got any other offers?
100%.
Yeah, anybody else? What about how many percent conceal the scar? Okay, well, let's find what the research says. 100 young people. Interestingly, this was really interesting. It wasn't quite as severe as we think. 60%, around 2/3 saw their body as disfigured. 2/3 reported that the scar represented an appreciation of health. Around half conceal the scar. And the other one, attention to the scar experiences positive and 1 in 5 and negative by 1 in 5. So scars are more complex than we know. Scars are your story. Scars are the person's story. They're not necessarily, people will have a complex relationship with their scar. So open up to the fact that it might not be as black and white. Talking about emotional impact, we have chatted about that. So I'm moving. This is a bit on the Cardiac Blues resource. And these are the, what Mel put up before. This is what we call an emotion and feeling wheel. Did anybody know there were that many emotions out there?
Oh, wow.
Oh my golly, gosh, how am I feeling today? Amazed. We have a very limited language of emotions in our society. We have a wider language, but if you look at this wheel, you will see that we use a very limited range for these feelings. Why does that matter? Because in order to manage emotions, it's useful to name them. It helps us to name them in order to tame them. So once we know what our feelings are, we can start to understand and manage them so they don't overwhelm. So when you see where our young heart patients might be, there might be fear, scared, helpless. You're going to react differently to fear, insecure, inadequate, or to rage, hostility. There's going to be different through knowing this and knowing this a little bit clearer and widening your language of emotions so that you can actually become a bit more fluent. You don't have to speak this language fluently, but slightly more than 6 words is handy. So be thinking about when you use emotional words, how restricted and limited your vocabulary is. That's my challenge to you. So through naming, we can get people to come up with constructive ways to manage. And that works for ourselves. You don't have to be a young cardiac patient to benefit from this. I'm not going to do that in a moment. The other thing that I can do with people is, even when it rains below, we can rise above the clouds. So we can be in a storm of emotions and rise above and notice. And this is this mindfulness stuff and getting the noticing self out. And that sort of stops that so absorbed by it that we see nothing else, so stuck that we're trapped. So there are ways and strategies that as psychologists and that we use to help people to manage what seems unmanageable. Grief. We need to manage that grief and loss. We need to be aware and to know that there is no one way to grieve. There is no, they're stuck. There is no. We have to be very careful about how we consider and see people who are grieving, and we have fixed stuff in our head about how long it takes to get over it. And in a sense, a heart condition is a grief that gets revisited. It gets revisited when you have, you're thinking about having children, you're thinking about marrying, you're thinking about partnering up, you're thinking about whatever. There's that sense of it being revisited and reprocessed. That's not a bad thing, because our relationship with grief changes over time. So people might use this numbness, they might have this period of confrontation and this restoration, alternating between dealing with emotions and life. they might cycle. And that's okay. We're not the experts on another's grief. This is Australian Centre for Grief and Bereavement. It's got some great resources around picturing, what grief is and how it looks. And I like the way that they've got this physical, intellectual, emotional, behavioural and spiritual. So a very much more complex way of grief than many of us might see grief as an emotional, but it's a whole of body experience. So anxiety, we had anxiety is a normal response, and I think many of us, all of us will have anxiety. And quite often people are only thinking about this fight or flight. But there's also your freeze and faint part, where you're frozen stiff or you flop drop with your anxiety. So it's a powerful reaction, a powerful emotion. One of the things that we have to be aware of is that avoidance in and of itself drives and creates and sustains anxiety, and that many people will get anxious about anxiety. And so we get into a bit of a loop, a bit of an anxiety, anxious about anxiety, increased physiological arousal, monitoring physiological arousal, getting anxious about that's getting worse, more physiological. And so we will do a very big struggle with anxiety. Many symptoms. It feels crap. But, you look at yourself right now, you can all do a little self-assessment. Out of 10, where would your anxiety be? Some of you will be 1 or 2, some of you might be 5 or 6 or 7. So we all walk around with a different level of background anxiety, which means it's when we have an anxiety-provoking trigger, if we're already walking around with a 5 or a 6, it doesn't take us much to get to panic. So we need to think also not just about panic and that exacerbation, but where our baseline is. And one of the things that we like to do is drop the baseline a bit. So then when we have an exacerbation of anxiety, we're going up from a 2 to a 5 or a 6 rather than a 5 to a 10. So it's really resetting our internal equilibrium, so to drop the baseline. And one of the ways that we can do that is by being aware. Being aware, where am I at the moment? How can I bring myself down? Just 1 point. How can I bring myself down from a 5 or a 6 to a 4 or a 5? And through that, this checking in and reducing the baseline, we can actually have mindful ways to reduce the impact of anxiety. And the other thing that we do with anxiety is, treating, being aware of the power of it and how overwhelming it is. And I have a few patients who are surfers, and they call it like the rip. You don't swim against the rip. You go with it, eventually it stops, or you go sideways, but you fight it, and you're caught in the struggle. So getting them to see how they see when they've got it going from anxiety to panic, that, the horse is out of the stable, the chemicals are out, and we just reduce the fight. It is just anxiety. Feels crap, that it is. So through labelling it and name it, then we've got a bit of equipment to deal with it. So that's something people will know about those. And what we want to do as psychologists is we want to bring more of this prefrontal cortex. We want to bring that back online rather than this limbic system, this lower brain that takes over, that sort of rings the fire alarm, the limbic overload. So we want more of this prefrontal cortex which we can exercise the brain through doing mindfulness, which is about noticing. It's not getting rid of the thoughts. It's starting to notice and name. In and of that, we're starting to bring some activity to this prefrontal cortex. So it's not just all in the limbic system. I'll leave that. So managing anxiety, understanding, naming and recognising the anxiety, grounding, recognising trigger, problem solving and the rest. I want to talk about existential. I'm not going to talk about trauma, sorry. This resilience, there's recovery, there's invulnerability, but what I'm really interested in is post-traumatic growth. People heard about post-traumatic growth? Hands up. Who's heard of post-traumatic growth? One. Who's heard of post-traumatic stress? This is why we want to talk about post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic growth was a concept brought about by Tedeschi, probably about the 70s or the 80s, and they initially did a lot of research around parents who've lost children. And they were seeing these positive psychological change experienced as a result of adversity. And the adversity had to be there. If you sailed through, you didn't get it. Struggle had to be there, and that was the same with the research we did at the Heart Centre. The struggle had to be there to get to this post-traumatic growth. And when I run cardiac rehab group, I'll talk to people about that. I don't say it's compulsory. I don't try and fast-track them into it. I don't say it has to happen. I say be aware that this could. This is, in a sense, some of their meaning making out of this. And you've heard people talk about their new understandings of their self, of the world, their relationship with their future, and how to live life. So there is that sense of wisdom and benevolence that is coming out in our patients prior to that time when it would be occurring. This is this post-traumatic growth. And this creating meaning, and this, as a psychologist, the work I do with these clients is to adopt an existential approach to help people transcend and transform. It is about living with anxiety. It's not about we're going to get rid of anxiety. Anxiety is vitality. Anxiety is life. Anxiety tells you that this is important, that it is a conflict that you've had prior to your time with the fact that death is part of life. And it's a wisdom that you don't want to have. It's a very uncomfortable wisdom. It does settle back down over time, but it's extremely uncomfortable. But as part of this, there is a striving for identity and a capacity for self-awareness, a search for meaning. They come with it. This is powerful stuff that when you're working with death anxiety, existential awareness, in our young people, very different to when you're working with this in our older cohort. But I do have some, in the older cohort who very much react like this because for them, this is the first time that they've become aware that they're mortal. So this experience of understanding and knowing we are mortal will happen to all of us at some stage in our life. For some people, it happens earlier, and it's quite a burden to hold. And we need some compassion around that and understanding. I put these slides on my grandson's photos. He's a keen photographer, so he'll be proud. This is part of my search for meaning. So these aims of existential therapy is actually to listen. So this is the work I do. I'll listen, let people tell the truth, let them reveal their deepest, biggest, most scariest fear. Help them to live passionately and to the full. Facilitate their understanding of the contradiction of the human condition. Strengths and weaknesses, and feel confident about living no matter what to come. So it's a real investment in life, investment in now. And then what we do with that is thriving. And that's about meaning, purpose, values. And I love this stuff from Viktor Frankl, which is these different sorts of values. Experiential, what we take from the world. Creative, what we give to. And attitudinal, how we deal with suffering. And these are all values that inform the way we choose to live our life. But that, if you like them. Thank you.
Rosemary's session is going to be a fantastic segue into our last bit, which is we're doing a launch of these brand new resources of young, I'm just trying to do this, young patients' stories. And I've chosen 3, so we had a number of videos made, and I've chosen one which is 6 minutes, and it's young people talking about getting to know a new normal, which has been discussed several times. And the other one is a quick one around intimacy, and another one's around what they've got from connecting with other people through supporting young hearts. So they're all up with something about 9 minutes, I think. Do you mind moving here? I can't shut that one down.
So here that the first one is adjusting to one. Yeah, great.
I'm really fortunate with my heart history and the surgery that I've had, that pretty much I had the surgery and it was dealt with at least for the next 10 to 15 years. So I've got a porcine tissue valve, and we chose that valve so that I could have kids. That was definitely on the radar for us, and so that was a big decision for us medically. Did we have a porcine valve and therefore be able to have children, but then need to have more surgery in 10 to 15 years when the valve needs to be replaced? Or did I go mechanical valve and not have to have any more surgery necessarily, as much as anyone can know these things, but then having children was going to be a lot more challenging. So there were big decisions that we were weighing up along the way. James and I had lots of big conversations about what we wanted. But beyond the period of the surgery and the rehab, there haven't been huge amounts of changes that I've had to make.
I think there can be a lot of stress and pressure, and I guess it's definitely something facing me, of having to take a lot of time off work to recover and getting back into work. And I think that a really good and open, line of communication with your manager, your supervisor, is something that really has helped me if I've had to take time off. I think as well as that, I've been quite fortunate at my employer that I have services like employee assistance programs where I can talk to a counsellor and it's confidential, and that's quite a bit of a short-term fix. But I think if you've got stuff on your chest that you need to talk about, there have certainly been things in my role that have triggered emotional responses in me that wouldn't be triggered in someone who didn't have a heart condition. For me, working through that, I've been quite open about that with my employer and said, hey, this is what this made me feel. And I think just being honest about it and just being honest about your feelings with your employer. I think you'd be surprised. Most employers don't really want to make it any more difficult for you than it already is.
You can't drive for 6 months after a heart event, and then for 6 months, if you get a shock, it's another 6 months. So all up for me, it was a year that I wasn't allowed to drive. So Peter had to be the wheels of the family. It wasn't too long after it all happened and I got brave and said, all right, I'm going to get back into netball. I like doing that, I'm going to do that. And then that brought on the first round of shocks. So then I was too scared to walk the dog, too scared to go and get the bins down the driveway. I wouldn't be at home by myself under any circumstances. My parents had to basically live with us for a while because I refused to stay at my own home by myself. And then Peter got super, super anxious and super nervous if I was home by myself. That fear of if something happens and no one's there.
The idea of Emma living with the device, that takes some getting used to and some coming to terms with. And it's something that changes over time. Like I think, Emma was very, very wary and I think anxious of the defibrillator early in the piece. I think that feeling sort of changes over time, and instead of being sort of an anxiety about it being there, you actually become quite dependent on the idea of it being there, knowing that, if anything happens, it's the first line of intervention that's, hopefully going to save Emma from something serious.
Shifting to the anxieties of my upcoming surgery, there's plenty I'm worried about. I'm worried about a new scar. I'm worried about a pacemaker that's going to bulge out of my chest. I'm worried that something will go wrong. I guess the way I work through that is that I know that I'll, be staying with family throughout my recovery. So I'll have people around me that can at least just be there to watch TV with me so I don't get lonely. I'm going to take a bit of time off work as well, just to give myself enough time to recover from this surgery properly and not try and overdo it. I think as well, I have a really good relationship with my cardiologist and my surgeon who will be doing that surgery. So I think that puts me at a lot of ease and gives me a lot of comfort. But I think it's just going to be one of those one day at a time kind of things, and working through it and breaking things down into manageable steps so that I don't feel overwhelmed and I don't have all these expectations about how I should feel and where I should feel in my recovery, and physically what I should be doing in my recovery. I've made sure that I've prepped myself mentally not to have these expectations.
I think what you need to come to terms with is your life's never going to be the same as it was before. And you've got this sort of idea in your head of what we're going to do this year, next 5 years, next 10 years, and that fundamentally changes. And you long for that idyllic,
carefree.
Yeah, you long for that picture of your life you had before, and you mourn the loss of that. And that's hard to come to terms with. Even still, I think every day you sort of get used to a new life, and you have a new idyllic picture of what this new life looks like. But you get better at dealing with that all the time.
Oh, go for The next one is thank you.
I have been for a long time unwilling to do anything because I don't want the heart rate to flare up. You talk to medical professionals and my medical team, and they've said there's no risk, there's not an issue, but it's a mental thing of I don't want to make my heart rate go up. Because we were both really struggling, it was like built a wall up between both of us, and neither of us were willing to communicate and do anything. We have to solve that part first before we sort things out what's the word? Intimately? What's the word?
Yeah,
that word.
We'll go with that. Yeah.
That was actually Edward who had the cardiac arrest in the supermarket in Bacchus Marsh. Oh, thanks, Kev. And the last one is just a little quick video, that one there, about these young people and how connecting with supporting young hearts and what a difference that's made for them.
I think to this day my heart condition makes me feel lonely. And I think that's probably not an experience that's uncommon to people with heart conditions, because I think everyone's heart condition is a bit different. Dealing with that loneliness, I think, is a challenge. And I think that this Supporting Young Hearts program has been really good in helping me to sort of attend events where I can meet other people who have got heart conditions, who are adults living with heart conditions.
About a year ago, this ad popped up in my Facebook feed about something called Supporting Young Hearts, and they were running a workshop for women covering a whole lot of issues around heart stuff, but also fertility and mental health and all sorts of things together. And I'm part of the Facebook group now, which is great. There's people with all sorts of heart stuff going on. I was trying to work out how to organise my travel insurance, and there's people there who gave advice because, you know, we have pre-existing medical conditions, and so you've got to tick boxes on forms and all that kind of stuff. And it's nice that there's that group there, and we talk about big stuff and then little stuff like travel insurance. So it's really good. It's been nice to meet people who have dealt with similar things and face similar challenges.
The thing that appealed to me was it was aimed at people in, you know, younger years of life, and we would all sort of have similar situations if we would be working or trying to get back to work, or we would have families. When you're at home and everyone else is living their life, you don't know whether what you're feeling is normal. It was good to hear that what they were thinking was exactly what I was thinking, and what they wanted was exactly what I wanted, just a normal, stable life, and they were all after the same thing.
In an effort to make myself feel useful again, I reached out to the Heart Foundation to do some volunteer work. I started working with the Supporting Young Hearts Committee, and I am a member of the advisory committee for the Supporting Young Hearts, which has been a fabulous 3 years with events, videos, forums. Connecting with the Heart Foundation made me feel useful again.
So these videos are 3 of, I think we've got 15, and you can access, all of you will be able to access them, and we'll have them on our YouTube channel and also part of our electronic package I talked about before. And we really encourage you to play them whenever you can, use them any way you like. We've got a whole series of, the first one that was for 6 minutes, we've got ones about diagnosis, lifestyle changes, words of wisdom, a whole lot of them in various themes. So today's the first time anyone's ever seen them, except for Mel and I in the office. So before we finish up, there's, Eugene.
And just be assured that you have videos online that have seen
You didn't know that?
fine, because the projector's just a little bit excited.
If there was one last thing I need to do in your packs, I think a few of you were filling it out before. We have a pink evaluation form, and it's really great, really vital for you to fill that out, because this stuff that we get from you today, we put into our submissions for further funding, and also the feedback we get from you, we really listen to and we take on board for other events and other resource development. And I'd just like to thank you all sincerely for coming, because without you registering and turning up, we actually don't have events. So we sincerely appreciate it, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing with young people, and I hope that you've taken something back from this today and can go forth and heal. Thank you. So you just want to hand them in. So Phil and Eugene down the end there, the evaluation collectors.